All right, so we're going to talk a little bit of history now regarding the saints. We're going to talk about Saint Agnes, and we're also going to talk about Saint Sebastian. And we're going to be reading some articles from FranciscanMedia.org. And this is just a little bit of fun history. And one other very important thing that I should point out is we have actually found a place on the internet where the comment section is not defiled nonsense. And not only have I made myself unemployable in the Church of the Nazarene today for talking about theology and I have also defiled somewhere on the internet, which you can probably deduce where it's at, but I'm not going to say where it is because I don't want to lead anybody else to go there and corrupt their comment section. But there is a place in the world where the comment section is nothing but beautiful prayers, and I've asked a question there. And I feel so guilty about it. We were looking at some artwork, and we couldn't actually read the letters on something. It was in Latin. We wanted to figure out what was there. And so that has happened. We have contaminated not only things within the Church of the Nazarene today, but things elsewhere. So it's just been a bad day for us on the internet. But all the same, let's talk some history. Believe it or not, there are actually days of the year attributed to certain saints, not just All Saints Day, which happens in the fall, but we also have certain saints of the day. And while we're not just going to be talking about the saints for today, we're going to talk about some around the weeks because I think this will be a fun thing that we can do as the church to learn our history and also just be stimulated to have something to learn about our own culture. So let's start by talking today about Saint Agnes. And I believe we have a little bit of artwork to pull up to share with you on her. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to share a little bit about Saint Agnes.
So Saint Agnes's saint day is January 21st. So for this year, I think that's Sunday. But her story goes as following. Almost nothing is known about her, except that she was very young, probably about 12 or 13, when she was martyred in the last half of the 3rd century, so the last half of the 200s. Various modes of death have been suggested. Either she was beheaded, burned, strangled. We even heard one legend that pretty well kind of put all of those together. Legend has it that Agnes was a beautiful girl whom many young men wanted to marry. Among those she refused, one reported her to the authorities for being a Christian. She was arrested and confined to a house of prostitution. The legend continues that a man who looked upon her lustfully lost his sight, but it was restored by her prayer. Agnes was condemned, executed, and buried near Rome in a catacomb that eventually was named after her. Later on, the daughter of Constantine would build a basilica in her honor.
Okay, and again, that's from FranciscanMedia.com, .org, FranciscanMedia.org. And St. Agnes is the patron saint of girls and Girl Scouts. And it's a really interesting story, and it's one that's really relevant to our culture today because what happened to her, again, she had all of this tragedy and martyrdom happen to her as a young girl. She was just somebody at the age 12 or 13, so not very old in life when she was martyred. But essentially what happened is the culture wanted her to conform to certain things. They wanted her to get married. They wanted her to engage in more adult things. And because she was a Christian, she was convicted not to. She ends up being forced into a house of prostitution and ultimately becomes a martyr. We live in a day and age where when people do turn hostile to the church, they may claim that they want certain things. They want tolerance and things like that. But really what they want is compulsory involvement. And of course, we see the same thing happening in a few incidents that have happened here in our own culture lately. I'm not going to get into too many details of that because I know I've already made enough people upset today. But the story of St. Agnes really is one that we should appreciate. If you're ever looking for some fun history, do spend some time with the saints, and I highly encourage you to look up St. Agnes. Again, we don't know a lot about her, but what we do know is as Amanda has shared with you. So let's move on now to discuss Saint Sebastian. And Saint Sebastian's Day is January 20th, so that hasn't quite happened yet. But Amanda, would you share the story of Saint Sebastian with us?
All right, Saint Sebastian, another one that we don't know much about historically, and that happens a lot with a lot of the early on saints because their story gets told and retold, and a lot of whatever original manuscript their story was written down probably hasn't survived to this age. But anyways, so again, we don't know much about him except that he was a Roman martyr, was venerated in Milan even in the time of St. Ambrose, and was buried on the Appian Way, probably near the present Basilica of St. Sebastian. Devotion to him spread rapidly, and he is mentioned in several martyrologies as early as 350. The legend of St. Sebastian is important in art, and there is a lot of iconography. So basically icons that depict him and his actions. Scholars now agree that a pious fable has Sebastian entering the Roman army because only there he could assist martyrs without arousing suspicion. Finally, he was found out, brought before Emperor Diocletian, and was delivered to Martian archers to be shot to death. His body was pierced with arrows, and he was left for dead. But he was found later still alive by those who came to bury him. He recovered but refused to flee. One day, he took up a position where the emperor was to pass. He accosted the emperor, denouncing him for his cruelty to Christians. And this time, the sentence to death was carried out, and Sebastian was beaten to death with clubs. He was buried on, as we said, the Appian Way, and close to the catacombs that would bear his name.
All right, so there is Saint Sebastian, and he is the patron saint of athletes and archers, of all things bizarre. I almost feel like that's a bit of a insult to Saint Sebastian. See how he was attempted to be, I should say, they attempted to execute him using archery as the mode of execution unsuccessfully. And now he is the patron saint of archers. I feel like if one was on the not receiving end of that, you would be much more likely to be the patron saint of archers. But all the same, that is Saint Sebastian for you. Again, these are very interesting characters from history. They're important to the iconography that we have in our world and to art. And we just wanted to share a few saints with you. And we'll be back here in a few moments.